The sun rose over the desert airstrip like a blowtorch behind smoked glass. Heat shimmered above the landing zone, distorting the outlines of trucks, helmets, and high-gain antennas until even the grounded aircraft looked like they were drifting. The concrete pads radiated warmth through the soles of every boot that stepped across them. But Morgan Vance didn't adjust her pace. She moved in the same deliberate rhythm she always did, clipboard tucked under one arm, gloves clipped to her belt, eyes scanning the familiar curve of the CH-53 Sea Stallion in front of her. It sat in the prep zone, motionless, massive, and weathered. The rotors were still chained down, tail boom angled to the east, where the wind came sharp and dry. The tail rotor itself caught the light in a dull half circle, motionless and heavy, like a door locked shut. Morgan passed beneath it with a glance, not out of awe, but awareness. She had logged every hour that bird had flown since its last full maintenance cycle, marked every microfracture on the fuselage skin by hand. She knew where the hydraulic lines curved too tightly, where the skin flexed in thermal swell, and which panel latches required a second press. None of it showed in her face. The mechanics on the north pad were already bantering about the next rotation cycle. One of them raised a hand toward a passing pilot with a wide grin, grease darkening the edge of his glove. Another leaned against the wheel strut of a smaller bird, laughing into a comm mic. Morgan walked within a few feet of them. No one greeted her. At the edge of the tarmac, a lead pilot in mirrored lenses nudged his elbow toward a junior officer and murmured, just loud enough, "Co-pilot with tenure, still riding shotgun after 3 years." The junior didn't laugh, but he didn't correct him either. Morgan made no sign she'd heard. She approached the port side engine intake, reached up, and inspected the tag looped through the security bolt. Her own handwriting marked the bottom edge of the laminated slip. 100.0 hours. Oil cycle reset logged. No initials. Just the work. She stepped back and recorded the tag status on her checklist clipboard. The board was scratched and slightly warped from heat. Corners softened from years of sun and sweat. The creases along the paper edges traced years of repetitive movement, and the plastic sleeve bore the faint impressions of checklists reused and rewritten. No one read them but her. No one had to. They knew she would. Her uniform held no call sign. The flight patch on her shoulder was regulation standard. The name tape just below the collar reading only Vance. She wore her gear clean, not crisp, and her boots bore the faint imprint of the same daily path hanger to pad, intake to tail, checklist to silence. She ran drills no one asked her to run. She reviewed procedures for failures that weren't expected. Her name hadn't been on a lead manifest in over 1,000 days. The airbase behind her groaned with life. Forklifts beeped near cargo pallets. Jet turbines spooled up in the middle distance. A shout carried across the hot wind from the refueling shelter. None of it touched her. She checked the latch lines along the CH-53's belly, fingers pressing against every fastener, every seam. She paused once to wipe a bead of sweat from her brow, then resumed her sequence. Intake, exhaust, tail, bay. No one interrupted. The squadron office log still listed her as qualified, current, and unassigned. That line hadn't changed in over a year. When rotation orders were issued, she wasn't called. When flight seats were briefed, hers came last, often as an afterthought. She was not disliked. She was not dismissed. She was simply never mentioned. Morgan finished her walk-down and stepped back to view the aircraft as a whole. The Sea Stallion looked like it always did, monolithic and static, its potential locked behind protocol and hierarchy. She stood in its shadow for a moment longer, then marked her final box on the checklist, and returned to the storage case where she logged tool handoffs that no one cross-checked. At the far end of the pad, 2 new pilots debated control modes under simulated tail failure. One mentioned auto-rotation as a theory, then laughed when the other said it had never been executed successfully without full rudder assist. Morgan didn't glance over. She knew that airframe better than they did. She also knew no one had ever asked her opinion. The wind shifted slightly, brushing sand across the concrete in faint waves. Morgan turned her back to it, clipped her gloves back onto her belt, and walked toward the edge of the hangar. Her gait was steady. Her hands were clean. The CH-53 stood behind her, tail rotor glinting, locked in place. She did not look back. She had already memorized every inch of it. The desert stretched below them in soft, rippling haze as the CH-53 dropped toward its approach vector. The relief crates had been cleared for drop at Grid Echo 7, a forward patrol camp marked by a dust trail and 2 half-sunken tents. Morgan Vance sat in the co-pilot seat, headset adjusted, eyes scanning engine readouts and descent rate while the pilot beside her narrated his control inputs with casual authority. Black Dog, as he was known across the squadron, flew like he briefed sharp, aggressive, and always with an edge of humor. He kept one hand loose on the collective and one boot propped slightly against the center console. He talked more than he adjusted, reciting glib observations over comms, his voice full of that confident rasp pilots earned from yelling over rotors and sleeping through alarms. Wind from starboard at 4 knots, visibility clear. Let's not make this pretty. Just get her down, feed the dogs, and head home, he said. Morgan acknowledged with a soft copy and marked the terrain slope on the tablet in front of her. The flare from the ridge hit before either of them finished the altitude check. There was no warning. Just a sharp strobe of motion outside the port window, followed by the signature hiss and streak of a shoulder-fired rocket. Morgan's peripheral vision caught the heat ripple, then came the impact. It hit aft, hard and direct, a percussive thud that cracked through the hull like a spine snapping. The aircraft lurched as if pulled sideways by a rope. Morgan's seat harness jerked tight. Warning tones blared in her headset, and every panel on the console lit in red. She saw it immediately. Tail rotor control 0. The torque imbalance kicked in with brutal speed. The helicopter yawed violently left, spinning around its vertical axis. Crates shifted in the cargo bay. One of the crew shouted something indistinct over the internal comm. Morgan's fingers flew across the instrument panel to comm, disabling the automated assist system and switching to full manual input. Beside her, Black Dog's voice slurred. Tail's gone, what the hell, pressure's dropping. She turned. Blood was trailing from his forehead, his right arm limp against his chest. He tried to reach the collective again, but missed. His head slumped forward. She didn't speak. Morgan gripped the cyclic. The CH-53 was rotating rapidly now, desert blurring into sky through the cockpit glass. Her left hand went to throttle override. She stabilized blade RPM. Her right adjusted pedal trim useless. She knew, but muscle memory tried it once anyway. No response. No tail rotor meant no counter torque. She cut the pedals and locked into asymmetric input, shifting the main rotor pitch manually. Sweat beaded instantly along her hairline. In the cargo bay, another voice came through the headset, tight with panic. Are we going down? Who's flying? She didn't answer. The aircraft bucked again, nose swinging like a pendulum. She dialed back collective to drop their vertical speed. The yaw wasn't gone. It never would be, but she could bleed it out over distance. It wasn't going to be a straight landing. It would be a managed collapse. Outside, the ground patrol had already scattered. Dust trails whipped around the camp perimeter. Several soldiers had looked up just in time to see the CH-53 spiraling through the sky, tail mangled, smoke streaming from its rear quadrant. One of them ducked behind a blast wall and shouted into his handheld, "We've got a bird spinning in Jesus. It's got no tail." Back in the cockpit, Morgan's vision narrowed to instruments and instinct. Her voice stayed low, calm. RPM holding at 98.7. Descent rate stabilized. She reached across and gently pulled the pilot's shoulder back to ensure his airway was clear, then returned to the controls. The firelight from the damaged tail flickered across the canopy. The smell of scorched lubricant was starting to rise. Her knees braced against the floor plate. She began a controlled descent in partial auto-rotation, guiding the aircraft toward the flattest patch of desert she could see through the spinning glare. The CH-53 had never been landed like this by someone in her seat. She knew that, and no one had ever trained her for it. But her hands didn't shake. Her breath stayed slow. Every twitch of the cyclic translated through muscle memory. Through years of silent repetition, no one noticed. Below, the camp's perimeter lit up with movement. Soldiers crouched behind supply crates, necks craned upward. Someone asked again, "Is she flying it?" The question wasn't answered. Morgan adjusted her altitude by feel. RPM was starting to decay, but she had a margin barely. The terrain was hardpan and brush. If she could keep the nose forward and the roll angle under 10 degrees, they had a chance. She tuned out the alarms, the shouting, the burned metal smell. All that existed now was glide, torque, and ground. She could already see the landing zone take shape in her mind. One last correction to make. One place left to put them down. The CH-53 groaned in the air like a wounded animal, its frame vibrating under stress that no checklist had ever described. The spin had slowed, not stopped. Yaw drift rotated them 1 degree per second on the vertical axis. Not enough to send them spiraling again, but enough to feel it in the stomach, in the eyes, in the way the wind outside fought the broken fuselage. Morgan Vance didn't flinch. She braced against the floor with her boots and shifted her right hand slightly on the cyclic. The helicopter responded by pulling a fraction right. It wasn't balance. It was tension managed like an overloaded cable. Every second, the aircraft wanted to collapse. Every second. She stopped it from doing so. RPM was holding just under 93%. She heard it before she saw it. The blade resonance dropped half a tone as the edge of the main rotor cone tilted through crosswind. She adjusted collective input to maintain lift without overloading the main gearbox. Her left hand hovered near the trim tab but didn't touch it. The tail section was gone. There was nothing to trim. Smoke passed the right window in thick bands. She could see the curve of the ridge now low and reddish, hardpan marked by shell rock and sparse scrub. There was a clearing just beyond the ridgeline, but it was uneven and sloped slightly west. She made a mental note and rerouted her descent trajectory, bearing north-northeast by 13 degrees. The cargo weight was already shifting. She corrected for that. 2. Behind her, voices erupted again over the intercom. "We're gonna hit somebody, say something." The shouting came from the crew chief near the back ramp. Another voice, quieter, cracked in from the open channel. "Get the medic ready. They're not walking out of that." No one asked for her status. No one asked who had control. They assumed no one did. At the forward base, 50 meters below, soldiers crouched behind low barriers and vehicles. Most were shielding their eyes, trying to make sense of the spinning silhouette against the sky. From the ground, the aircraft looked like it was staggering. The tail boom smoked openly now, trailing dark ribbons that rippled in the downwash. One junior mechanic standing near the fuel truck pointed and said, "That's Vance. That's her. She's flying it." No one responded. The captain beside him kept scanning the sky and said, "No way they're bringing that down clean." Inside the cockpit, Morgan tuned out the radio chatter. Her world had narrowed to 3 things: blade RPM, yaw rate, and the slope of the terrain beneath her. The warning lights had gone stale. The indicators meant less now than the tone of the rotors, the color of the smoke through the canopy, the shift of her own weight against the stick. She pulled 1 millimeter right. The aircraft gave her a half second of stillness. In her chest, her heart remained steady. She had trained her breath to match blade rhythm. In, hold, out, reset. She'd done it during unlogged sim hours when no one noticed she stayed late. She'd run unauthorized tail failure drills on legacy builds of the CH-53 flight model, patched in from archived maintenance training files no one used anymore. She wasn't supposed to be flying, but she knew the tremble of a 92% RPM blade tip. She knew the creak in the seat rails when torque split across the central mast. The cyclic under her hand felt like part of her arm. She didn't have to think about it. She just moved, and the aircraft obeyed. The pitch drifted left. She adjusted yaw input. The nose tilted, she lifted collective to slow descent, then bled it off again. She was balancing a top-heavy shell over broken terrain with no tail rotor and one unconscious pilot. And it was working. Her headset cord had slipped from its mount and hung loose against her shoulder. The calm silence from the front channel matched the system that never included her. She flew anyway. Through the spinning dust, the ground came into focus. There was a flat stretch of desert just beyond a dry wash. She checked her rate of descent. Still too fast. The aircraft was stable but heavy. Auto-rotation demanded altitude to convert. She didn't have much left. Just under 100 feet above ground level. She banked slightly and used her angle to trade momentum for control. The wind pushed back. The aircraft dipped once. Hard. Her thigh slammed the edge of the seat. She gritted her teeth and corrected without hesitation. From the ground, someone shouted, "They're trying to land." Another voice argued, "No chance, it's too steep." But then the CH-53 angled again, smoother this time. The blades didn't shriek. They hummed, slower now, intentional. Morgan tracked the clearing again and checked her heading, nose forward, roll holding within 5 degrees. She felt the aircraft in her spine, in her rib cage. The vibration patterns had changed. It was leveling. She counted breath against descent. In, hold, out. 4 seconds to touchdown window. The cockpit's temperature had climbed sharply. Sweat rolled down her spine under the harness. Her gloves had slicked from it. She regripped the stick, refocused her eyes on the horizon line just above the canopy edge. The aircraft bucked once more crosswind shear, localized. She corrected. Her knees locked, arms loose. The CH-53 came down slowly, like a giant animal folding its legs, still spinning gently, but controlled. The rate of yaw now steady and predictable. She used it to guide the landing angle, not fight it, accommodate it, let it be part of the descent. The fire at the tail still burned. The frame had taken damage, but the rotors were decelerating evenly. Ground was 30 feet out, then 20. The instruments flickered, battery reserve low. Morgan didn't look down. She didn't need to. Her whole body already knew where they were. The dust came in thick waves, curling across the windshield in slow pulses as the aircraft approached the ground. Visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. The CH-53 tilted with the breeze, not violently, but in the same way a large animal leans into the wind before deciding whether to fight it. Morgan Vance kept both hands on the cyclic and collective, breathing through her nose, shoulders held steady despite the strain tightening through her arms. Below, the platoon had gone silent. Most of them were crouched behind low cover, watching through squinted eyes as the aircraft descended with its tail shredded, rotors feathering wildly in the turbulence. From the command post near the ridge, binoculars tracked the smoke and body angle. Someone reported the rate of descent out loud, expecting to need it for an after-action summary. Someone else asked if medical was staged. No one spoke Morgan's name. Inside the cockpit, the world had narrowed to vibration and memory. The torque was decaying. She could feel it through the frame. Not from gauges, they were unreliable now, but from the tilt of the nose cone. The rhythm of wind through the cracked side seal. The flicker of light moving across the inside of the canopy. The right yaw came again, more aggressive this time. She countered with a full-body lean, banking slightly into the drag, letting it pull them into alignment instead of resisting. She counted under her breath. 5 seconds. 4. The rotors were slowing, just under 91%. She adjusted her pitch angle to trade height for stability. The landing gear was 10 feet from the surface. She could see the shimmer of heat off the sand now. The flick of a broken crate tarp fluttering near the LZ. It looked like a signal. Her eyes narrowed. The CH-53 dipped again, then rose slightly as she flared. Exactly 6 feet above impact, she dropped the collective with controlled force. The main blades adjusted instantly, shedding lift and dropping them into the zone between hover and descent. They slammed down like a falling barn. The rear wheels struck first, then the front gear, and the right strut bent so far she thought for 1/2 second it would snap. It held. The aircraft rocked hard, nose yawing left from residual torque, then settled into stillness. Smoke filled the cockpit, not thick, not black, just enough to sting the eyes. A haze of burned oil and composite dust filtered in from the rear bay. The panels flickered. Warning tones silenced themselves one by one, unsure whether to keep sounding or give up. The rotors ticked down in speed, still moving, slower now, like the end of a clock winding itself still. Outside, no one moved at first. Then the ground crew sprinted from the edge of the ridge, foam packs in hand, stretchers slung across their backs, yelling for medical clearance. From a distance, the landing had looked like impact. No one believed a controlled descent could end like that. Inside, Morgan sat motionless. Her hands were still on the controls. Her breath came slow, loud in her ears. The headset was silent. The pilot beside her had not stirred. The blood on his flight suit had dried at the collar. She reached up slowly and turned the radio volume knob to 0. She was still strapped in, every harness point locked. Her gloves were soaked, fingertips worn. One finger had pushed through the leather seam. She flexed her hand and released the cyclic for the first time since the impact. The aircraft shifted a fraction as she let go, then stopped. From the open side window, the fire at the tail was visible small. Contained now. Dying. Someone outside was shouting instructions. Another was trying to open the side door. She heard boots on metal and the creak of the side step folding down. She didn't answer. Her body was still frozen in the posture of flight. The smell of the cabin was chemical and metallic, not fear, not sweat, just the memory of heat and friction and control. Her jaw was tight, her neck damp. Her legs had started to tremble, but not from nerves. It was adrenaline leaving her system. The landing was done, but her body hadn't caught up yet. A technician leaned in through the side hatch, eyes wide. He paused when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said into his mic, quietly, "Co-pilot alive. No visible trauma." He didn't ask how she had landed. He didn't know what to say. She reached up, thumbed the battery cutoff, and watched the remaining indicators blink to black. The inside of the cockpit darkened. Smoke drifted past the glass. Outside, the soldiers had begun to crowd the LZ, keeping a wide berth from the aircraft. They weren't shouting anymore. They were looking, watching. Morgan released her chest harness. Last. Let it retract slowly into the seat, and leaned forward until her elbows touched her knees. Her gloves dropped to the floor with a dull thud. She stayed there for several long seconds, breathing, blinking slowly, eyes locked on the floor panel in front of her boots. Someone outside whispered, "She did it." Someone else said, "That's not possible." Inside the cockpit, Morgan heard none of it. She reached down, picked up her gloves, and held them in her lap. The CH-53 stood broken but upright. The rotors still ticked in slow rotation, each turn quieter than the last. The side hatch opened with a long metallic groan, hinges resisting after too many cycles in the heat. Dust poured in, followed by the sharp sound of boots hitting the ramp. Medics pushed inside first, flashlights cutting through the smoke. Their eyes scanned the cockpit, then froze. Morgan Vance was still seated, arms slack in her lap, gloves resting in one hand. Her head turned slowly as the first responder reached her side. He didn't speak. He just crouched and checked the pilot beside her. Pulse found. Still unconscious, but alive. The medic lifted his radio and gave a short update. One injury confirmed. No fatalities. Behind him, 2 more medics climbed in. One of them stared too long before moving forward. Morgan unbuckled her harness. The motion was slow, not from pain but from stiffness. Her shoulders ached from tension. Her palms still carried the ghost of the cyclic's pressure. When she stood, her knees wobbled. She let the moment pass. Let the muscles remember how to hold her upright again. She turned toward the ramp and stepped down. The light outside was harsh. Full sun washed over the broken airframe, and the smoke seemed paler now, rising in soft tendrils from the tail section. A half-circle of soldiers stood at the edge of the landing zone, unsure whether to approach or stay clear. Some were still crouched, staring. A few had their phones out, recording silently. She walked slowly down the metal incline, boots thudding on each ribbed panel. When she reached the sand, the shift underfoot reminded her that everything solid could still move. The heat came through her uniform in waves, and she blinked against it. No one stopped her. To her left, two techs were deploying a foam hose toward the smoldering tail section. A fire team stood beside them, just in case. To her right, one of the younger ground crewmen was still frozen in place, helmet pushed back, mouth slightly open. She didn't meet his eyes. She didn't meet anyone's. One of the flight supervisors stepped forward from the edge of the growing crowd. His boots stirred dust as he approached the rear of the CH-53. He looked up at the rotors, then down at the ground. He called out without turning. Who was flying? Someone near the ramp started to speak, then stopped. Morgan kept walking. The commander from the ops tower arrived seconds later, radio still clipped to his vest, dust streaking the edge of his collar. He scanned the landing zone with practiced eyes, caught sight of the aircraft's condition, and exhaled sharply. The tail rotor was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The rear fuselage looked like it had been bitten clean off by force. The commander muttered something to the flight supervisor. It was hard to hear, but someone standing nearby caught the end of it. No checklist covers that. The flight supervisor replied in a lower voice. I think she wrote her own. Behind them, the crew began to unload the pilot on a stretcher. He stirred once, then went still again. A medic asked for vitals. The response was stable. Another soldier whispered, that bird had no tail. A second added, she flew it. A third said, that's not even in the manual. The sound around the helicopter changed. It wasn't quiet, but it wasn't loud either. People weren't barking orders. They were watching, as if something unreal had just settled into the sand and no one quite knew how to touch it. Morgan continued past the foam line. Her gloves hung loose in one hand, her other brushing the edge of her flight harness. Her vest was soaked through. Dust clung to her shoulders and the back of her neck. She didn't speak. A technician leaned toward the commander and asked quietly, do we log this as a crash? The commander said nothing. One of the rotors let out a soft tick as it turned again. Slower now. It sounded almost like breath. Morgan passed between two maintenance crewmen. One stepped back instinctively, unsure whether he should salute or step aside. She gave neither command nor acknowledgement. She just walked. Her checklist was still inside the cockpit, wedged behind the pilot seat. No one noticed it. No one would retrieve it. The last box had never been checked. The cyclic had returned to neutral, untouched, center aligned. The aircraft stood tilted slightly, tail low, frame exhausted but unbroken. As Morgan passed the outer ring of personnel, a flight officer leaned toward a colleague and asked, was that her Vance? The colleague didn't answer. The wind picked up slightly, catching the edge of Morgan's sleeve. She adjusted her grip on the gloves, blinked once into the sun, and kept walking. Behind her, the CH-53 sat in a bed of settling dust, surrounded by a base full of people who had once decided she was not needed. Now they didn't know what to say. The command room was too quiet for mid-cycle. No printers, no headsets squawking for clearance. Just the low hum of the ventilation and the scuff of boot soles as personnel hovered near the back wall, uncertain whether to speak. 3 officers sat at the main table, a fourth standing near the screen with a digital stylus in hand. On the center display, the damage report scrolled past in dry, clinical language. Rotor loss, hydraulic breach, communication degradation, unauthorized override. That phrase blinked red twice before the system stilled it. Someone cleared their throat. It was the administrative deputy, a young officer assigned to incident compliance. He pointed to the override marker with an open hand and said, technically, she broke protocol. This wasn't a certified training event. It might trigger a disciplinary review, especially if she bypassed cockpit chain of command. Across the table, no one responded. Then a voice from the far end of the room, an older logistics captain with silver at the temples, spoke without looking up. His tone was quiet, not dismissive. She landed it. The screen froze. For a moment, no one moved. Then a junior technician, his ID badge still clipped crooked from the rush, brought up the footage. He tapped into the airfield security feed from the ridgeline. The wide-angle view showed the CH-53 coming in, tail rotor gone, smoke trailing off the fuselage like a brushstroke in sand. The camera zoomed automatically as the aircraft dropped toward the ground. No voice accompanied the feed. No labels. Just the grainy video of a helicopter descending in visible yaw drift, angle compensating at the last second. The final touchdown was rough, but complete. The rotors stilled. The aircraft didn't collapse. The tail didn't snap. The crew inside had survived. One officer leaned forward, lips parting as if to speak, then stopped. In the reflection of the screen, the young deputy who'd suggested review policy saw his own expression change. It wasn't embarrassment. It was uncertainty, like watching something rewire itself in real time. No one spoke her name. Morgan Vance walked across the far hangar alone. The sun was lower now, but the heat still radiated off the concrete in shimmering waves. Her flight harness hung from one shoulder, boots trailing a faint dust print with every step. She passed the edge of the maintenance zone, the rows of lockers, the metal sink that always ran cold. A few technicians watched from a distance. They didn't speak either. Rumor had already outrun her. She heard it in fragments. She flew it. There's no training for that. I thought she was grounded. The words were not directed at her. They hovered, passed from person to person like wind through the rafters. She didn't respond. A pair of crew chiefs moved aside as she passed between them. One of them blinked and started to raise his hand in greeting, then stopped. Morgan didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to. Her posture was calm, controlled, but her steps had a weight to them now. Every motion deliberate, every breath slow. She stepped into the main hangar bay and crossed to the bench near the intake lockers. It was empty. The afternoon crew hadn't cycled through yet. The bench was dented at the edge where someone had once dropped a fuel gauge, the spot where she usually sat to check systems reports. She set her gloves down first. The left one had a tear at the thumb seam. The right was stained at the wrist from hydraulic fluid and sweat. She pressed them flat against the bench. Then she reached to her collar, unpinned her name badge, and placed it on top. For a moment, she just stood there. Behind her, the murmur in the hangar faded. Someone had entered with a tablet. Another was watching the footage again on a mounted screen. Her image, seen from a tower's camera, was pixelated, but unmistakable. The aircraft landing, her face behind the cracked cockpit glass. The technician who had once joked about her being deadweight stood frozen now, watching the playback. He didn't speak, didn't move. In the command office, someone pointed to the footage again. There's no tail input at all. She used rotor blade pitch and torque balance to yaw stabilize it manually. That's not in any procedure file we've approved. Another voice answered. Slower. She built it herself. She must have... Outside, Morgan walked toward the barracks. The sky was a pale orange now, the sun melting behind the ridge. Dust still clung to the back of her flight suit. A faint red streak lined her right elbow where the console edge had pressed during descent. She didn't wipe it. As she passed the motor pool, a soldier leaned against the gate and looked up. His mouth opened slightly as if to ask a question, but he stayed silent. She didn't break stride. Back in the office, the playback looped, the moment of landing, the tilt, the impact, the recovery. Someone watching whispered, "Who authorized her?" A pause followed. Then the answer came, low but certain. She didn't wait to be... Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that go unheard the longest. Morgan Vance didn't raise her hand. She didn't argue for a seat or beg for recognition. She waited. She studied. And when everything failed, When the airframe twisted and the odds turned impossible, she didn't flinch. She flew. No spotlight followed her down the ramp. No headline printed her name. But the silence left in her wake said everything. This is a story about quiet readiness, about knowing your worth even when no one says it aloud, about surviving the system that never made space for you, and walking forward anyway. If that resonates with you, take a moment to reflect, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or follow for more stories that honor the strength you do not have to shout to prove. There's power in staying steady when no one expects you to rise.